The high-speed rail line HS2 is overpriced and maybe too fast for its own good, according to a group of transport experts. Roger Harrabin is our environment analyst. Roger, who is this group of transport experts and what are they saying?
It's a group of academics, many of them quite eminent, many of them retired, who say that because they're retired, they can now take a truly independent view on HS2. They think that, broadly speaking, a lot of academia and consultants and big business have been sucked into the great circle around HS2 and will benefit from profits. And they say they think that's led to insufficient scrutiny. And they're making a few points here. I mean, firstly, they're dubious about the route. Although they support high-speed rail, they're dubious about the route. They think the new line will help London more than it helps the north. And one thing, I mean, you just mentioned that in the lead-in there. They're especially critical of a decision by HS2 to future-proof their track, in their terms, by building it so it can take super-fast high-speed trains running at 240 miles an hour. Now, that's much faster than the 190 miles an hour, which is normal for continental high-speed trains, which cover much greater distances. And the academics say it simply can't be justified in little Britain, and it's really increased the costs and increased the carbon emissions too.
And those costs, I mean, the comparison with the way the French do these things is phenomenal.
I mean, I really couldn't believe this yesterday when the academics sent me their calculation about the differential between the costs. And I didn't plug this story for most of the day because I really couldn't believe that this was right. But the academics are saying that for an equivalent piece of high-speed track in France, HS2 will cost 5 times as much. Now, I put that figure to the government before lunch, 11 o'clock. It took until 7 o'clock in the evening to get a response, and that response was no response. So they didn't respond to the allegation that it will cost 5 times as much, although they do make the point, and the academics accept that, land is much more expensive in the UK, it's much more urbanised. But the academics say that part of this cost increase is because of the extra fast running, and they want the whole issue looked at by an independent inquiry.
7 minutes to 7. The high-speed rail line HS2 costs 5 times as much per mile to build as the latest high-speed TGV rail line being built in France. That's according to a group of transport academics. They also question why it's being designed to run at super-fast speeds of 240 miles per hour, which is much less green than the more typical fast train speed of 190. Well, one of those behind the report is Tony May, who's Emeritus Professor of Transport Engineering at the University of Leeds. Good morning to you, Professor May.
Good morning.
Now, I don't know if you heard Roger Harrabin a few moments ago saying that when he first saw your figures on this, he struggled to believe the costings because they were so high. How did you reach them?
Well, they are extraordinary, aren't they? The £56 billion that HS2 is expected to cost is a government figure. The costs for the TGV line come from a well-regarded rail technology website which provides estimates for all such projects. In a way, it's not surprising because when you look at what they're proposing at Euston alone, that is getting on for the cost of the whole of that TGV line. So it's a very expensive, very over-designed project. And what concerns us most is that it has 4 objectives, but as we see it, it will only ever reach one of them.
OK, but just before we move on to those objectives, on the questions of cost, it's always going to be more expensive. I mean, for exactly you take the location you point out, Euston, central London, expensive.
Oh, of course, yes. And we're not comparing like with like, but a 5-fold increase isn't, we think, justifiable. If you turn it the other way around and say, what are we getting for our 56 billion? What the scheme was designed to do was add capacity out of London, improve connections between cities, regenerate the north, much made of that, and contribute to reducing carbon emissions. And the only one of those that it clearly and acceptably achieves is increasing capacity. The others are very doubtful indeed.
OK, but let's take two of those others. Improving connections, doesn't it obviously do that?
Well, of course it does, between London and the centre of Leeds and the centre of Manchester. But what's hidden in the information is it's planned alongside cuts to existing services. For example, Stockport and Wakefield will have their service frequency to London halved. So their alternative is to travel into Manchester, into Leeds, in order to benefit from high-speed rail.
But you just look at the population of Leeds, Manchester versus Stockport, Wakefield, and there's a logic to that.
Well, there is. But then if you look at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's figures on where the 12 most impoverished cities are, 10 of them are in the north of England, so there's a clear case for investing in the north of England, but none of them is immediately adjacent to either of those stations. If you take someone like Bradford or Rochdale, they are likely to suffer as Leeds and Manchester grow.
But isn't there an argument that, and this brings us to one of those third objectives, which is regenerating the north and what you're talking about there, that if you do build up Leeds and Manchester, yes, there may be elements around it that are hit, but overall the whole area will benefit?
To some extent, but the evidence is very, very uncertain. We've looked at three economists' estimates of the regeneration benefits, and they range from 10 million a year to 15 billion a year. So the economists don't understand this. If you look at the 40 years
forgive me, but we're up against it time-wise. In a word, would you cancel it?
What I would do would be to look at alternatives. I think 10 billion for capacity in London and 20 billion for improvements in the north, and you'd have a significant sum left for other better causes.